What I found by the riverside. The air was chilly, but Fern Kominsky's gray hoodie kept most of it off his back. His eyes darted left and right through the underbrush, blindly moving bunches of dead leaves with his poking stick. A long, spindly branch of an oak tree that had fallen off last spring. As he walked along the river's edge, his feet kept sliding on the wet rocks, and more than once he had fallen smack on his ass. His jeans became saggy with the extra water, giving his gait a somewhat penguin-like stance, and his socks turned cold against his skin. He was so bored out here, but in the late afternoon, where else was there to go in this dump of a town? The school was locked up, so no more hanging out in the cafeteria. Playing jacks with his best buddy, Charlie Spuds, a tall, lanky geek with cracked glasses and an asthmatic high-pitched whine for a voice. His hand-me-down clothes gave him a sad appearance, and secretly, Fern would never tell this to anyone. That's why he hanged out with him. No matter how bad his day was, he was always sure that Charlie's had been worse. It also didn't help that he was constantly called Potato Face by everyone. Even the teachers had to stifle a laugh when they called his name for roll call. This particular morning had started out well enough. His mom Edna had left him a huge plate of pancakes in the fridge before she had left for her job as a waitress at the Forest Hills Diner. Their car had spun out and hit a ditch last fall, and she simply didn't have enough in her savings to fix it. The diner was 5 miles uphill and surrounded by poison oak and wiry shrubs. Fern knew that she was going to be covered in sweat and grime by the time she opened the back door. "Not my problem," he said out loud to the empty house. After finishing his cakes under a heavy mountain of syrup, he threw his ratty backpack over his hoodie and ran to catch the bus to Montgomery Emerson Elementary, the only school in Kingsport, a tiny speck of a town on the map with just under 600 residents. A vast majority of them retirees of the local power plant, all living in crumbling apartments with faded parking lots and vending machines stacked with stale cookies and moldy chips. The main drag, Gilwater Road, ran north and south along the river and was cut off both ends by rusty railroad tracks that hadn't seen use in over 50 years. It was encroached on all sides by 1,000,000 acres of evergreen trees and towering hills. No major expansion had occurred here since the late 1800s, and back then it had been a supply depot for the army. The long, cracked road was filled to the brim with small stores, fashioned with clapboard siding and cedar shaking on the roof, all in 1,000,000 shades of pastel paint, all chipped and flaking off. In a previous life, most of these stores had been houses built for the mill workers. But once the mill closed in '39, they got bought up by hipster beards and spiritual old grannies that turned them into organic produce stores and whiskey tasting bars. After suffering through a day of boring classes, Charlie told Fern about a gold coin he had found near the Chickpea River. "It was huge, all yellow and shiny. I only had time to glance at it before Chuck Grant was all over my ass." I asked him why, but all he could do was mumble something about the locker room. Chuck was one of those classic old school bullies that had been held back so long his classroom desk might as well have had a red rope and a reserve sign on it. Fern ignored Charlie's admission of being chased and asked why it was called the Chickpea River instead. With a depressed sigh, Charlie explained it was named that because the water had a green, sickly cast to it like throw-up, thanks to the flow of illegal chemicals being poured in from the effluent pipes of the commercial laundries that dotted the river on both sides. The polluted water had turned the grass and shrubs that grew near the edge a dark, oily brown, and the fish that found themselves unfortunate enough to swim in this toxic soup, either dead and floating, or mutated with 3 eyes on their faces and legs sprouting out of their ass. Fern didn't really believe Charlie all that much about the gold coin. He rarely believed anything he said anymore, seeing as how Charlie still believed in Santa Claus. But Fern figured he still had a few hours before his mom came back. And like I said, he was bored. And nothing sparks the imagination like the promise of pirate treasure. So he bid Charlie adieu and made his way down to the back of the school, all the while looking over his shoulder for the bully in residence. Luckily, the place had cleared out pretty fast. It was almost summer vacation after all. Fern rushed through the rusty gate at the back of the blacktop near the forest of shitwood, all blackened and crumpled from that year's controlled burning, done by the volunteer fire brigade, and began his search, poking here and there, not really paying attention to the ground, when suddenly his sneaker hit a large hard something. He snapped out of his reverie and looked down. Lying near his foot was a shiny piece of gold metal in the dirt. It wasn't a coin as Charlie had thought, but part of something bigger. Fern squatted down and looked closer. I wonder if it goes deeper, he thought. He brushed off some mud, and sure enough, after digging his nails in and straining, he pulled up a small golden locked box. Except for the dirt, it was perfectly preserved. No dents or any signs of aging at all. It was almost as big as one of those old cigar boxes his dad used to collect. After his funeral 3 years ago, Fern had found a crate of them in the attic, all covered in dust, each of them bursting with yellow baseball cards. Hidden in the bottom of the crate, he had found a handwritten letter addressed to him by his father. It was full of late apologies, like never being there for him like he should have, and how he regretted not taking the time to really get to know him. Near the end of the letter were large drops of tears, long since dried, like his father's memory. After wiping his face with his handkerchief, Fern pulled himself up. He dusted himself off and ran all the way home, thinking, I've got to remember to tell Charlie he was right on the money. Well, a little bit right. By the time he got back, it was dark, the crickets creaking. He opened his bedroom window and crawled inside. He found his dad's crowbar in the closet and pried the box open, its contents falling to the floor. On the carpet lay a smooth, round gray stone, covered in dozens of concentric white circles. He bent down and held it in his hands. What the hell is this? He wondered. As he stared at the little white lines, they seemed to grow, getting bigger in his mind. They overtook his tiny bedroom, and soon his eyes were filled with white light. He felt his body swim upwards in a sea of pure energy, and the last fading thought from his ephemeral mind was, "It's so beautiful." When Fern's mother got home and found her son's body, she let out a long, wailing cry. cry. Hands clenched tight on both sides of her face. His body was still standing straight up, with both hands raised to the sky. Eyeballs burned out. His mouth turned upward in an unearthly rictus. A look of pure ecstasy. The stone had rolled underneath his bed, unnoticed and forgotten. The next morning it was gone. A relic of unknown origin, producing an unknown result. If you ever come across a glint of gold in your travels, be wary, or you too could end up just like Vern. They say curiosity killed the cat. Make sure you stick to